let me please join me in welcoming Ruth Chapman. Ruth Chapman's the business director from Vine Digital. I won't bother going through her bio. You probably would have seen that when you register for the event. I did notice that a lot of people that registered today are actually customers already of Ruth's. And I must say, as far as Vine Digital goes, we are also customers, and Vine Digital's also associate members. We've recently done an audit, and they've done a wonderful job of the audit that they've done for us. So we're really glad to be joined by Ruth today, and we're looking forward to learning more about search engine optimization. Over to you, Ruth.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to present today because I think this is a topic that is very close to my heart. Having worked in digital for about 14 years and specializing for the last 6 years in healthcare, I just know that this is a channel that I think our industry can really utilize a lot more. And I do think that there is a certain level of education that can help us to utilize it a little bit more as well. So let's get into today because we've got quite a bit to cover. And because I know that I've got the joy of starting a 9 o'clock workshop, I've started off with a little bit of an icebreaker. So we're not going to do this as a quiz. We're going to just do it a personal one, but I've got a little multiple choice for you. And I want everyone to just have a little think in their mind. Do you know when the first search engine was launched? And we've got 4 options: 1990, 1992, 1995, and 1998. So I hope you got your answer. Oh, would help if I didn't go too fast. All right, so the first search engine was launched in 1992, which doesn't seem that long ago. Interestingly enough, this search engine was not Google. It was an engine called W3 Catalog, and it works sort of like an online Yellow Pages. It was a very manual process. Websites had to send their website to a person. Person then determined their websites and then put it into almost like a catalog. So very old school, and we've come a long way since then. Everybody knows about search engines, and everybody knows that Google is our majority player. So just a little bit of interesting history. Google was first registered in 1997. The very first publicly launched Google interface came about in 1998. And I always love this slide because it always gives everyone that I speak to a little bit of a giggle, because we can all remember some of the very first search engines that we were introduced to, things like Yahoo, Ask Jeeves. There were a number of old ones that we used to get involved with. Google, however, was the very first, well, the first publicly interfaced crawl engine. And that's really important for our talk today, because I want to explain to you a little bit about how Google operates, and that in turn can help us understand how we can optimize our websites to fit Google's needs and desires. Just very interestingly, in this little picture here, we've obviously got Yahoo was the very first sort of commercial-based crawl-based system that was widely available, even though Google was launched in 1998. Yahoo then joined with Microsoft to become Bing. So we can see that search engines are constantly evolving. Similarly, some of you may have come across DuckDuckGo, which is all about consumer privacy, and was actually one of the first search engines that didn't collect consumer data. So for all of you that are hearing about the third-party no cookieless society, this is very interesting to watch how in the future DuckDuckGo goes. But as we know, Google is the majority shareholder. Most people use Google search. In fact, 90% of searches on the internet are made through a Google product. And with that being said, we did have a very interesting situation in Australia about 2 years ago when there was concern about whether Google would be pulled from Australian usage. And as an SEO agency, we did a lot of investigation to determine what this would mean for our clients when we spend most of our time on Google. But in those investigations, we could see that a lot of other search engines base their methodology off Google because it's just such a monopoly on the market. So we therefore have based most of today's discussion around how we look to optimize our websites for Google, because we know that every other player in the market follows suit from whatever Google does. Google is way ahead in terms of its learning, in terms of its AI, and therefore everybody else follows suit. So that is why we put so much focus on Google. Just some little interesting stats. Everybody loves some good stats. And obviously being involved in the healthcare industry, it's really important to understand why we need to be focusing on SEO. And our company's done a lot of work into just looking at what people are doing online, and internet users are not only purchasing health and beauty products online, but 54% of Australian consumers use Google weekly to search for medical information and symptoms. And almost 3 in 4 have self-diagnosed using Google instead of visiting a doctor. So this is a really interesting development, because looking back 5-6 years ago, Dr. Google was considered somewhat of a negative, but nowadays, especially because of COVID, people are a lot more used to interfacing online to find the information that they need. And also obviously being part of the CHPA, we want people to be able to find good quality information and be able to be involved in that decision-making process when looking for products. We also know that 53% of Australian consumers use search engines to conduct brand research before purchasing a healthcare product and service. So I know in our healthcare industry, we spend a lot of time making sure that pharmacists, doctors, end users have the ability to be able to tell our customers about the product. But if we're not making sure that our online interface is as equipped with information and the knowledge, we're losing out, we're missing an opportunity. And then also, just interestingly, more than 90% of the web pages on the global web receive 0 organic traffic from Google. Just about 5% receive 10 visits or less a month. Now, this sounds like a scary stat, but the only reason I included it is because a lot of people think that just because I have a website, Google will find it. And that's not always the case. So bear in mind, the stat sounds a little bit more scary, but we're talking about trillions of pages on the web. And all it means is just that if we don't make our website visible to Google, it's not guaranteed that Google will be able to find it. All right, my slides seem to be sticking a little bit, but that's okay. We'll get through this. So I've told you a little bit about the history of search engines. Let's go into Google and have a look at the specifics of how Google actually identifies what is important for you on a website. Firstly, Google uses a little tool called the Googlebot. These Googlebots, or spiders, are sent out for every single web page. So every time we launch a new site, every time we put new content on a site, these Googlebots crawl the website. And that was something that set Google apart and put it as this major publicly used search engine. No longer did we have, like I mentioned about that first search engine, no longer did we have someone manually determining what website needed to go where. We now have Google bots that are able to crawl through websites and decide what each page needs to be indexed for, and therefore what it needs to be ranked for. The Googlebot is what made Google so successful. It's designed to crawl websites, it's designed to crawl apps and data feeds. To be honest, Google has been doing the same thing for 25 years. This process of crawling, indexing, and then showing information hasn't really changed, but Google in 25 years has become more clever. So as you will see in this webinar, SEO has changed slightly in how we determine what's most important. For example, the most recent changes that Google has made is it's realized that text is not the only thing that websites include. So the bots are starting to identify images, videos, other elements on the site, but we are still in a stage where content is the most important thing. And at the moment, search results are still 80% based on what content matches what keyword searches people are putting in. Every day, the Google bots are crawling trillions of website pages. So we don't actually have an exact figure on how frequently Google crawls your website or how frequently Google crawls pages. But SEOs love stats, they love data, and there's conservative speculation that Google crawls 9,000 pages or more per second. It's likely to be more because we're always conservative when it comes to guesstimations. But that means that every single search query is an opportunity for Google to recalculate its decision on which page is most relevant to show. So as a website owner, it's really poor form for us to consider that if we've done website once 10 years ago, that our website is going to be fine. Every day, Google is redeciding who is most important to be shown at the top of their search results. And if you don't do SEO on your site, you might fall behind because other sites that are doing SEO have the opportunity to be recalculated. Indexation. So the Google bots crawl your site, they index the site, and indexation is the process of identifying what is found on that page. If the Google bot can't reach your page, if it can't crawl your site and understand your website, it cannot be indexed. And this is where majority of those websites that aren't even getting any, they're getting zero traffic, it's because they aren't able to be indexed. Without indexation, it's almost like your website doesn't exist and it won't appear in search results. Technical SEO is one of the tools in the SEO toolbox that first and foremost helps us to identify what is Google seeing when it crawls your site. And if it crawls your site, are there any pages that are missing? Is there any journey that is stopping the bots from being able to go through? But indexation is pretty much just the process of bots crawling your site and determining what is on that site. It's kind of like if you are cramming for an exam and you read through a textbook, you might highlight some of the key points on that chapter, and that helps you to determine if you're trying to find something on that subject, you go back and you can find it easily. All right. Now, Google doesn't just send out its bots anywhere, anytime. Some of the downfalls of the early search engines was the fact that they spent so much time crawling through your website. And every time somebody accesses your website, it's a cost to your site, for example. It costs server space, it costs server energy. So Google only has a limited crawl budget because it doesn't want your sites to slow down or stop serving because there's so much activity happening on the page. It also doesn't want to invest all of its server time crawling through sites that don't follow Google best practice and that are hard to find. Just think about yourself as a internet user. If you go to a website and the page takes 2 seconds longer, well, sorry, 2 seconds is a good time, but if it takes 10 seconds to load, you start getting frustrated and you want to leave. In a similar way, because Google has a limited crawl budget and it goes through trillions of pages every single day, if Google starts to find that you are taking up too much of its time, it's not going to want to revisit your site, send its spiders to re-index, and it won't potentially pick up on some of those new optimizations that you might be doing. So you might be updating the content on your site, you might be launching new pages, but there's only a limited crawl budget. And part of technical SEO is to make sure that we have easy access for those bots and that we use the minimal amount of crawl budget in order to be able to make it a nice experience for Google and invite the bots to keep coming back. Many of you who are doing SEO campaigns will have gone through a technical audit at the very beginning of your campaign. It is a standard practice for an SEO company to do an audit. It's kind of like going to your GP and having a checkup. You make sure that we know exactly what's going on with your site. We can then triage and diagnose if something's really important. And this is where crawl budget comes into play. You may have pages, for example, that are no longer visible on the front end, but we still have back-end coding that tells the Google bots to crawl through those pages. That's using up extra crawl budget and meaning that maybe the bots aren't getting to the core content that you're wanting them to view. So making sure that you don't have any broken links, you don't have any redirect loops. Elements like this help with minimizing your crawl budget and making Google more happy to return to crawl for new content on the site. Okay. Now, all of the elements that I've spoken to up until this point have been about pretty standard technical checks that we've been doing for the past 25 years. Google has started to identify the fact that, oh, I beg your pardon, sorry, I missed a slide. You may have also heard of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So this is another crucial technical SEO element, and it also helps with the readability of the websites. So similar to where we were talking about having a crawl budget and making sure that Google can find all the pages on your site, once they get to those pages on the site, Google is a machine, and we speak to a machine in its own language. So Google, being a machine, reads in the language of HTML. HTML is the most acceptable script that is easy for people to find. So we make sure that all of our coding is done in HTML. And that includes images as well. CSS and JavaScript, JS, are some of the ways that we code things. And many of you who will have engaged with SEO before will have noticed that when you do things like site speed optimization, we need to make sure that there is not any excess code. So excess CSS or JS, both of these concepts are elements that help Google to identify when I get to this page and show it, I want, for example, my headings to be styled in bold, in blue. CSS is the code that tells the robot how to display the front end of the site. And in coding, you can code verbosely, or you can code concisely. So when you try to speed up your page, you want to make sure that you've been as concise as possible with the directives that you've given Google. It obviously comes back to that crawl budget as well. The less code you have on your site, the quicker it is for the bots to get through and understand what's happening on the page. It still helps to have a good front end experience, but you just want to make sure that the back end is not clunky and not full of code. Right. As I mentioned, all of the things that I've spoken to up until this point are things that you may have come across and you may have understood. Now, as a search engine, Google is always trying to remain top of the pack and top of being most relevant. And Google has started to understand that not everybody is viewing everything via a desktop website. Online experience is expanding, and for the past 2 decades, Google has done a really fantastic job and has just basically based all of its optimizations off that desktop and small amount of mobile experience. But it's starting to realize that mobile app, other online elements are starting to overtake just the pure website experience. So, for example, smaller screens, different internet connections. You know, some people have 4G, some people have 5G, some people don't even have that. They're just accessing low data modes. This has forced Google to understand that if they want to reach the maximum amount of potential customers, webmasters have to look at a multitude of screens and accessibility. So it's not just purely about the coding of the site, it's also about, do we have a really easy accessible site across all functions and site speeds? So it started to introduce 2 things that are going to come into play in the future of SEO for all of us. One being, and some of you would have already come across this, it's moving towards a user experience type of categorization. So Google's page experience. If any of you have logged onto Google Search Console, you will have seen that this is a newer metric that's been introduced. It looks at not just how quickly does your page load, it also looks at how your page loads. So do you have a lot of moving elements? Do you have elements that when the initial page load, they load after? And is that a good or a bad thing? So page speed has gotten an upgrade. It's no longer just the basic model, it's version 2.0, and it incorporates websites, apps, front page loading, it also includes what's loading behind the scenes as well, something that you might have come across in Core Web Vitals. Obviously, also mobile usability has always been something on our minds for about the past 4 years. However, it is something that we are starting to realize is becoming more and more and more important. It's totally unacceptable to not have a good mobile experience on your website. Google will start to be less willing to show your site if it's not good on mobile. And then we also need to make sure that our HTTPS is set up. And that means just for every single page on the site that we have a really secure access. So most people would know the HTTP security side of the site with the implementation of an SSL certificate. These are just a lot of acronyms, but this is also something that comes up in our Google Search Console, and it's all about having a good page experience. Also, in order for Google to try and improve this overall one big digital environment, which has multiple devices and accesses, it is also starting to introduce a new measurement platform. So everybody is aware of Google Analytics, the core of how we measure the success of our websites online. And Google Analytics is having the biggest change that it's had in the past 2 decades, where we are starting from June next year to be forced to move to something called GA4. And GA4 is just a platform that allows us to incorporate these user experience, page experience tactics into the measurement of our sites. So it starts to not look in individuality at a desktop, a mobile, and an app. It starts to look at if somebody accesses on any of those platforms, what is the collaborative experience, and do I have a good experience with this brand or this website? So technical SEO is very important, but the crux of what we want to talk about today is how do we use the channel of SEO to grow my website? We were talking in the very beginning about how people are searching more and more online for information. And we know that COVID has changed the way people work. And we know that people have gone from being a lot more acceptable for advertising to just be told what they need to do. People are starting to be a little bit more, they want to be involved in the decision-making process. So part of our role as consumer product advertisers is to make sure that we are giving them the most correct and relevant information to make the decisions, and hopefully then to go and buy our product based off that decision. So SEO content. First things first, content is king. If you are wanting to use SEO to grow your site, content needs to be almost the first thing that you need to prioritize. You may have heard this already. You will keep hearing it. And this is not something that has changed in the last 25 years of Google operating. Content is king. Technical SEO should never be the crux of any SEO campaign. It is a really good starting point because, as we said, if people can't find your websites, no matter what you do, you won't get growth. But if you want more rankings, if you want more search engine visibility, you can't expect to make any changes unless you make changes to the content of your site. Unfortunately, Google is not as hungry as it used to be. And that is just simply an effect of the fact that there are more and more websites joining the World Wide Web every single day. So Google's crawl and Google's available resources has actually grown as well. So in order to make sure that Google comes to your website, we actually have to convince it that there's a reason that it needs to come to your website. It's not just automatically going to come. All right. Everybody knows that SEO is all about manipulating and impacting keyword ranking. By improving keyword ranking, your website gets more visibility, and the knock-on effect of that is greater organic traffic. And in our business, it's all about growth. We want to reach more customers. So what is the connection between keywords and search intent? So let's have a little bit of a look into this. Google's crawling function, as previously mentioned, it's not evolved that much, but the algorithm of how Google ranks websites has changed. And one of the reasons that that has changed is because the nature of search has changed. 7 years ago, if you were doing an SEO campaign, it was all based on keywords and only keywords and singular keywords. So a while ago, if you started an SEO campaign, you would have reached those wonderful pages that said, if you are looking for a paracetamol medication, then come to this company because they will offer paracetamol, and paracetamol is helpful for paracetamol-related illnesses. Keyword stuffing was the name of the game. People don't read like robots, and Google understood that. So it started to move towards a lot more of a natural function. We also know that with the introduction of items like voice-activated search, as well as just consumers moving from being fed advertising to being a bit more empowered in the decision-making process, people have moved away from just one keyword-based search, and they've moved into a lot more of a questioning type of search. So Google is starting to understand that longer tail searches are actually a lot more prevalent. For example, as you would know, Google gives you a recommended, are you trying to search for this if you put anything into the search bar? And I've included a little graphic on the right here, which, for example, if you were to just type headache into Google, Google looks at all the different types of queries that you might be looking to do. The reason for this is that there's, unlike with trillions of websites and trillions of pages on the web, is unlikely to be one site that's going to fit your niche request. So if you're searching for a headache and you're searching for a headache related to COVID or headaches related to pregnancy, you're going to need a very different style of information on that page. And by creating a longer tail search term, Google is more likely to match the page with that user's intent. And if Google matches that user's intent, they'll keep coming back to Google for their searches. So in a similar way as websites, we also need to be thinking about our content in terms of that longer tail approach. And I will speak to this a little bit more further on. But nowadays, consumers' expectations of Google have changed. We ask our question to Google directly, and we expect to be provided with the perfect answer. We don't go searching. Nobody goes further than the first page. If they do, they really want to know an answer and they can't find what they're looking for. But we expect immediate gratification. So with that in mind, just a little bit of an update on how the search engines used to look. 6 years ago, if you were to search, and this is just an example that's looking for holiday homes in Greece, if you were to put this into the search engine, at the very top, you'd be given 4 ads, and underneath you would have your organic listings. And you can see even in these organic listings, there's an Airbnb, so you can actually book accommodation. There's property for sale. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for, I put this in thinking I want to book a holiday, not I want to buy a place. And then there's also apartments, and then there's another rental. So there was a couple of different types of matches to that about 6 years ago. Google realized we want that instant gratification. And if you were to put a search into Google today, you're served with a lot more options. So I've got 2 examples here on the left and on the right. They're different examples. But for example, if I'm looking for hospitals near me, firstly, I get served with a map because it's a location-based search. Then there's actually 2 listings. One is Health Direct, which will give me a directory. And then there's another one that's actually a review site. Further down on the website, Google's trying to make sure that it matches exactly what I'm looking for. So it's seen that I'm looking for hospitals. It'll give me some examples of links of where to find that. Similarly, on the right-hand side, if I'm looking for a paracetamol brand, first things first, we will still get our ads, but Google's removed that strong identification that these are ads. You can see it's gone from being a big, strong green box to a very small bolded ad. We then have Chemist's Warehouse, which comes up second because that's actually a purchasing-based website. And then we have pharmacies underneath that show us maps listing. So we're no longer sitting in an environment where you're only getting search terms for you're only getting text results for your searches, you're actually being shown a lot more. And especially when somebody puts in something like a search intent, you would have seen that you get shopping ads as well. So there's a lot more noise on your search engines. And that's another reason why when we're looking at content, we are no longer trying to look at just an individual keyword. Our real area for growth, our real opportunity is looking at very direct searches. How do we match an exact query so that we can try to break through some more of this clutter and we can make sure that our website is visible? So I touched on this a little bit, and I need to just make sure that I keep an eye on time. But search intent, as I said, just used to be about keywords. Google's understood that not every keyword is the same. And especially in the health industry, a lot of what we do is we're arming our customers with enough information to be able to make the right decision about how they keep themselves healthy. So Google's identified that keywords fall into three major categories: informational, navigational, and transactional. The healthcare industry operates mostly in our informational sector, unless you have an e-commerce function, and in that way we operate in the transactional factor too. Very few product-based websites are interested in navigational because we don't really have to have a location near for our brand. But we need to make sure that when we're looking at your keyword targeting, when you're looking at your keyword strategy, when you're looking at the content that you create for your site, are you meeting the need of the purpose for your website? So as I mentioned, in healthcare, majority of our sites are sitting in that informational realm. So when we're looking at what keywords we're ranking for, or we want to rank for, we want to be showing up for what is the best paracetamol to take for my headache. We want to be showing up for what are the common causes of headache. And you'll notice I use headache as an example quite a lot through this presentation. But very, very important. We're not just looking at, are we reaching thousands of keywords? We are also looking at, are those keywords matching the intent of what my website is supposed to be doing? Now, the crux of when you need to create content to try and rank for any of these keywords, as I mentioned, Google's not as hungry as it used to be. And while Google doesn't say exactly how it ranks websites, we have found from snippets that we've gotten from Google that there are certain elements that make a website more attractive to the Google bots. The concept that covers content is the acronym EAT. Okay, it doesn't stand for eating as much as I would love it to, because I love to eat. A concept stands for expertise, authority, and trustworthiness. So we're going to have a little bit of a look in the next couple of slides of how do we actually reach those elements. So first element of EAT is expertise. Google is becoming more of a personal assistant than a search engine. As I mentioned before, people are expecting to be served immediately with their correct answer. And you would have noticed even in search results, sometimes if you search a question, Google will answer that with a snippet from a website, and you don't even need to access the website in order to get that information. For example, if I was to type into Google, what are the common causes of headaches, it's very likely that I would have a snippet underneath that search result already answering my question without me accessing the site. So in order to be able to make good recommendations to its users, one of the first things that Google will do is to try to separate experts from the rest of the crowd. It's not going to answer that search question in the body of its search results if it doesn't feel confident that that answer is actually going to answer what the person's looking for. How do we become an expert? And this is something that a lot of people are learning. To become an expert, Google will reward your website if it can retrieve answers to the questions that seem related to the one that's being asked. Now, with trillions of web pages, Google needs to decide that you're better than another website. And how it does that is it looks at how much information do you have on that specific topic. So, for example, if we look for the term back pain in Google, the sites that show up first, you can see that the very first site that is showing up is the Mayo Clinic. All right. That website has 9,000 pages that mention back pain. The last result on the first page of Google has about 2,000 pages mentioning back pain. If we look at the second page results for the similar term, these websites have more than 1,500 pages mentioning back pain. So if we're really trying to go for SEO gold, which is ranking on the top 3 positions of Google for generic symptom-based search terms to match our customers' needs, that's almost the gold standard. Now, we don't expect any healthcare brand to actually have 9,000 pages, but just putting into perspective, this is how Google has determined that these sites are experts, by having a large portion of siloed content that all speaks to a similar topic. And I've got some case studies that I'll explain to you at the end of this presentation. Okay. If you find a niche, for example, and once you start building out that niche, it has a snowball effect. So, for example, Vine Digital, we're a digital marketing agency. We specialize in SEO. If we center all of our content on our website around SEO, Google's going to understand a lot quicker that we are an SEO agency. It might be a little bit hard to get that first page on SEO ranking, but once we have 1 page ranking, Google's more likely to rank a second. Once we have a second, we rank a third. By the time we've shown Google that we are an expert in the SEO theme, I could launch a page and Google could start crawling it within a matter of hours because it sees it as relevant information. So with this in mind, whenever we're launching a website, it's really important to sit down and have a thought about the concept of the content on the site. A lot of the times websites try to be everything to everyone, but we need to really make sure that instead we are being experts in one specific thing that is very core to our business, especially if you're a new website. Once you've gained that expertise in that area, then we start adding on more and more and more. And we make sure that that content is very thematically collected together. Okay. Okay. That is creating content, putting it on your website, making sure that your content is themed towards one area of expertise. That's called on-page SEO. However, on-page SEO works hand in hand with off-page SEO, and that's where the next 2 parts of the acronym come in. Authority and trustworthiness are off-page SEO. We have control over it, but not as much control as we have over the expertise. And that's why we've put so much effort into talking about making sure your content is expert. Off-page SEO talks to backlinks, brand mentions, and citations. Now, this is something in the healthcare industry that we have to be very conscious of, because we can't always, for all products and all industries, endorse our products ethically. However, we can get other websites and other areas that have similarly based interest groups to endorse our website. So having an SEO agency that understands the complexities of working within the health industry is really important, because we can't just do on-page SEO and expect our content to rank or our visibility to improve. We do have to do off-page SEO as well, because off-page SEO is the element that helps us to identify that authoritativeness. If we're an expert, but only Google thinks we're an expert, Google might start to second guess us. If we're an expert and Google sees that there are other people that endorse us and see us as an expert, it then starts to build the authority as well. So the two go hand in hand. Google relies on external factors to decide which websites should be considered as authorities within a topic. Think about it like if you're going to buy a new car. 9 times out of 10, you're going to go online and you're going to read about that car that you're wanting to buy and see if people have a good experience with it too. You're not just going to trust the salesperson who might be the expert in it, but you're going to get a second opinion too. So I'm going to go over this slide quite quickly for the purposes of time, but it's similar to like a scientist. Scientists have to publish a lot of papers in order to become an authority in their field. SEO is exactly the same way. The more you create expert content, the more people are going to see that as expert content and want to link to it. Things like hospital websites, general pharmacy websites, lots of health and wellness bloggers and networks, they are going to want to link to the content that you've written to your site. So while we can influence the level of authority by forcing the acquisition of backlinks, which is what we do in an SEO campaign, we artificially stimulate this natural process of people seeing you as an expert and then linking to your site. While we can artificially stimulate that, if we create good enough content, this is a natural process that should occur, and a healthy website should over time be gaining more authority. The last element in EAT is trustworthiness. Okay, so as I've mentioned, it's expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness. Expertise is having enough information on the topic to be the expert. Authoritativeness is making sure that we have enough accolades and other people saying that we're experts to give us authority on it, and then trustworthiness. How important is it to be trustworthy? Now, we're all working in the healthcare sector, so we know how important it is to be trustworthy. But just a little example, Google might see that you've got a lot of content around headaches. It might see that people are linking to that content around headaches. But if it doesn't trust you, think about this in this concept. Would you be suspicious if a doctor offered you medication in emergency room? You've got like a splitting migraine, you can't function, you go to ER, the doctor gives you medicine. You're probably not going to be that worried about it. Would you be suspicious if a remote acquaintance came to you and offered you medication that you didn't know about? You might second guess it. You might go do a Google search. You wouldn't necessarily not be open to it, but you'd think twice about it. Would you be suspicious if a stranger offered you medication in a nightclub? Now, I know there are some people that will go, yeah, no, whatever. But most of us would not take medication from strangers. And in a similar way, this is just an illustration to show how important this concept of trustworthiness is. If I write 1,000 pages on headaches, but nobody else links to my site, Google is going to be very suspicious of showing that website. So when Google's in need of context for queries that don't return any pertinent results, Google won't pay attention to your site unless it sees that you've got things like backlinks and other mentions and citations. When it has to decide between ranking your content or ranking content from more credible sources, it'll pick the most trustworthy sources. You could have exactly the same content, same amount of words, same heading structure, same page titles. If it doesn't trust your site, it will not show it. And especially for Google users, when health or finances are at risk, then search engines are even more strict on this. It is a concept that is called your money or your life. So Google understands that, you know, in that little example that I showed about would you take medication from somebody in a club, this is something that's quite important to you because this is something that could have a very severe effect. If we're talking about would you take a flyer from somebody in a nightclub, there's not really a big knock-on effect that could occur from that. So there isn't as much emphasis on being trustworthy in that case. But for us in the healthcare industry, your money or your life is very important, and that will be something that Google will take into consideration. Okay, I'm going to skip over this slide for the purposes of time. It was just an illustration of how Google will show a more trusted source over another for your money or your life search. We do also know that when it comes to your money or your life, sorry, we don't know for certain, but there is speculation that this is actually still manually done. So it's not as automated as some of the other SEO elements, especially because the world has just gone through this mass of miseducation and quickly changing information around COVID. There is speculation that a lot of this data was actually manually manipulated in order to make sure that it was even more trustworthy than an algorithm. Okay. Okay. So let's have a look quickly at some case studies that show SEO and this idea of website growth via content in examples. Our very first example was a client that came to us a couple of years ago. Their challenge was that they were well known, they were a good brand name, but their online presence was very poor. So it was just struggling to take off. Their sales had plateaued. And in Australia, we know that the market for infant formula is a very cutthroat one, especially because there's supply issues and things like that overseas. So the company came to us and they said, we need bigger online presence. We then take a little step back. We then have a look at what's the business objective. The main objective was to grow knowledge of their brand and their unique offering to mums. And ultimately, their business objective was that they wanted more product sales. So we can assist the product sales by informing mums more about the unique selling points of this product. We had a look at the website, and the reason that I've included this content, this case study, is that in this case, this is an existing website. It is already ranking for a couple of terms. But it didn't have a targeted SEO strategy. It didn't have a good grip about what are the keywords that are actually core to helping me achieve this business objective of reaching new mums. And the website was set up as such that it was a dump of information for everything. So we determined with the clients that in order to reach new mums, we really are looking to reach mums that are interested in finding out about infants, because we want to reach first time mums, because it's a lot easier to get a mum before she's already tried something and her baby's already on something. So we're looking for infants, and we're looking to serve those informational search terms. We're wanting to reach mums that are looking about mixed feeding, breast milk and formula. Those are the kinds of terms that we want to attract. So while, yes, it is relevant for this website to be ranking for something like toddler, my core business objective is to grow more sales and do that by reaching new mums. And so therefore, in this case, because we had a very clear set of keyword objectives we wanted to identify, this is a very unusual case of doing a content audit and actually removing content. We wanted to build up that expertise in being an infant feeding website. And so we decided that we were going to spend all of our Google energy on creation and optimization and promotion of our infant pages and remove some of the lesser performing toddler pages. So we picked up this piece. We firstly optimized existing content. We created new content along the realm of this topic, which is infant feeding. And then we used link building to promote it and get that snowball effect rolling. So these content pieces picked up highly in organic traffic, and over a 2-year period had a 200% increase in organic sessions over time. So let's just have a look at the key takeouts from this campaign. Here we go. I'm just going to, right. As I mentioned, SEO definitely impacts rankings, and the feed-on effect is organic traffic. So with this campaign's approach of investing the time and effort into their content, they went from ranking position number 62 on average at the beginning. Oh, hang on a second. This is actually the wrong case study. This is the second case study. Here we go. They were ranking at the beginning of the campaign, they were ranking around about 60 positions in the top 3 positions. And by the end of the campaign, with this targeted content strategy, they were ranking for 127 keywords. And this had a knock-on effect of increasing their average organic traffic from 2,000 average monthly visits to 4,000 average monthly visits. They also had a 5 times increase in their goal completions on the website. Now, they weren't selling it on the website, so we couldn't put a direct dollar value, but they've more than doubled the amount of people that are now exposed to their brand and the benefits that it has. Case study number 2. Similarly, this is a brand that operates in the iron deficiency environment. So an existing brand, existing website, it was an SEO'd website and it was doing pretty well, getting around about an average of 5,000 visits per month. However, as we know in the healthcare industry, medically and regulatory, we have to review our content every 2 years. So we used the opportunity to have a look at a website rebuild. So once again, we did our keyword research and we had a look at, is the site set up thematically correctly in order to be an industry expert on iron deficiency? So we had a look at the architecture, created a new architecture, created new elements to include more of those multiple pages, all speaking to the terms of iron deficiency. So whether it's pregnancy, whether it's what are the symptoms, what are the causes, what are some of the common ways that people have looked at it in the past, all kinds of elements around iron deficiency. We were able to further increase that topical expertise. Existing content was optimized, pages were broken out and fleshed out. And then finally, we could build that with some links as well to get promotion. And with this, as I mentioned, we finalized our content. This site saw growth in 2 years from 62 keywords ranking in the top 3 positions of Google. You can see that from June 2020 to April 2021, the website was pretty standard and plateaued. With the launch of the new structure, with the launch of the new site, the site was able to see growth. And we can see that overall, the site went from averaging around 5,000 visits per month to averaging around 17,000 visits per month at the end of a 2-year period, based pretty much on a content expansion. And my last example that I wanted to show with you is that I am aware that, for some products and some verticals, it is a lot easier for people to actually engage in content. For some, it's a little bit more restricted. If you were to play in something like a prescription field, or if you were just to play in something that needs to be doctor prescribed, it's not always as easy to create a large amount of content. So I have had instances where people have come and said, I'm going to do a once-off technical audit and I'm going to make sure that Google can crawl through the site, I can find all the pages, and that I just have all my metadata updated, and then they never look at the website again, or they might look at it once a year. The 2 case studies that I've shown before were 2 clients that decided to invest their time and their money into building the content strategies, and that's how they saw their massive growth. This client could not invest that time or that money into doing an expanded content strategy. They chose to just address the one leg of the table of SEO, which is the technical element. And what we can see is that over that same 2-year period in time, while they did see growth with a technical campaign, their growth over a 2-year period of time was only around about 1,362 visitors, right? So they went from roughly averaging about 1,000 visitors to just under 2,000 visitors. And that does seem like it is growth, but if you have a look at the size of the market for those same keywords, there is a size of a market of around 25,000 searches per month in Australia. So it just goes to show that if we only focus on a small segment of SEO, we don't necessarily get the same output. All right, David, I think I may have to
Yeah, just in the interest of keeping to time, we'll probably wrap it up, Ruth. That was an excellent session, and really obvious for me with dealing with the Vine team is that they're really passionate about search engine optimization. Speaking with Ruth today, she's really passionate about it, and they specialise in healthcare as well. So Ruth's very passionate about healthcare as well. And I guess with our dealings with them, we just found them to be so helpful. I might just quickly take a quick question. We've got a couple of questions. First one is, there have been instances as where organisations use their competitors' trademarks as keywords as part of their search engine optimization strategy. With the more sophisticated approach now being taken by Google, do you see this practice declining?
Yeah, love that question. It's something that I actually wanted to give you as a takeaway. When we approach SEO, it's really important that you take a step back from normal product advertising, because in SEO, your competitors are not necessarily the products that you sit next to on the shelf in Chemist's Warehouse. When you are looking at an online search page, you are actually competing against anybody speaking to anything that your clients are looking for. So if you are a paracetamol brand, your clients are actually looking for headache treatment or pain relief. If you search for pain relief, you are not only against other paracetamol brands, you're also against medical journals, you're also against chemist warehouses as such. And so moving forward, SEO practice is actually to discard the thought of trying to look at competitors' trademarks. I know that PPC still does engage in that tactic as part of the full search offering, and that is only if your competitors are really active. But for SEO, you actually need to take a step back. Your competitors aren't only your products, your competitors are also other people giving information in that same sector. And if you want to see growth and meeting customers' needs with relevant results, that is the approach that it takes to have an effective SEO campaign.
Yep. We do have another question, but I might email that through to you after the event and get them to include that in the email that I send out to everyone. So I will send you a copy of today's slides. We'll send you the recording from today. We'll also ask you to do some feedback. Please email through any questions. You can email me direct, or you can email Ruth and the team at Vine. She's happy to take on those questions. You did mention Google Analytics as, are they on the new GA4? Is that version in place at the moment?
So GA4 has been in beta testing for the last 6 months or so, some people even sooner. Any new site that gets launched and gets new Google Analytics is by default going to GA4 at the moment. And for most marketers, just a little heads up, some of our normal stats that we're used to might not be available. Elements such as bounce rate has been removed, and instead it gives us an overall engaged consumer value. So we also have some content on GA4. We may even be able to provide David with some of that, but it's something that is coming into effect. They are removing Google Analytics, Universal Analytics, in June 2023. So we all need to be upskilling. We all need to be preparing. It is coming.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to get Ruth back for another session. Hopefully you'll consider joining us again, because you really just scratched the surface today. And we really do need to dedicate some more time to it. So thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for everybody for joining the call, and we will hopefully see you again soon. See you later. Bye-bye.